My wife destroyed my lab the night I won a $2 million research grant. I deserves this more, she screamed, smashing my equipment. I remained calm, recording everything. When the university board saw the footage. But, you know that feeling when everything you've worked for finally pays off? That rush of validation, like the universe is finally saying, yeah, you got this. That's exactly what I felt walking out of the Horizon Foundation building with a $2 million grant check in my jacket pocket. $2 million. For my cancer research. 7 years of 18-hour days, failed experiments, and grant rejections had led to this moment. I was practically floating down Fifth Avenue, already picturing how I'd upgrade my lab equipment, maybe finally get that electron microscope I'd been drooling over for months. The cab ride home felt like a victory lap. I kept pulling out my phone to call Brielle, then stopping myself. I wanted to see her face when I told her. After all the times she'd rolled her eyes when I came home exhausted, muttering about another dead end or more wasted time. This would shut all that negativity down. We'd been married 7 years, and honestly, things had been rocky lately. She'd been distant, critical, always finding ways to remind me that her biotech startup was making real money while I was playing with test tubes. But this would change everything. I practically jogged up the stairs to our brownstone, fumbling for my keys like some teenager coming home from a first date. The house was dark except for a light coming from my home lab in the basement. Weird. Brielle never went down there. She always said the chemical smell gave her headaches. But hey, maybe she was finally taking an interest in my work. Maybe she was down there setting up some kind of celebration. Man, was I wrong. The sound hit me first as I opened the basement door. Crash. Smash. The unmistakable sound of glass breaking. Then I heard her voice, raw and furious, screaming words I couldn't quite make out. My stomach dropped. I took the stairs 3 at a time, and what I saw when I reached the bottom made my blood run cold. My wife was standing in the middle of my lab, holding my $3,000 microscope over her head like some kind of deranged weightlifter. Her hair was wild, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and she was wearing those designer heels she only broke out for important meetings. The ones with the razor-sharp points that could probably puncture a tire. Brielle, what the hell? That's when she hurled it. My microscope. The one I'd saved up for 2 years to buy. It hit the concrete floor with a sickening crunch, expensive lenses scattering like confetti. But she wasn't done. Not even close. I deserve this more, she screamed, grabbing a rack of test tubes I'd spent weeks preparing. I've been working just as hard. Where's my $2 million? I just stood there, watching her destroy everything. 7 years of carefully cataloged samples, each one representing months of work. My centrifuge, kicked over and sparking. My computer monitor, now sporting a spider web crack from where she'd thrown a beaker at it. It was like watching someone burn down a library, except every book represented a piece of my soul. Brielle, stop. Please, just stop and talk to me. But she was in full meltdown mode, stomping around in those lethal heels, crushing glass vials under her feet like she was making wine. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random destruction. She knew exactly what she was breaking. The expensive stuff. The irreplaceable stuff. The samples that couldn't be recreated. You think you're so damn smart, she continued, sweeping an entire shelf of equipment onto the floor. Walking around here like you're some kind of genius while I'm busting my ass trying to get investors. You get handed everything on a silver platter. Handed everything? I'd been living on ramen noodles and coffee for the past 3 years, reinvesting every penny into my research while she spent our savings on her precious startup. I'd supported her through her PhD program, even after she flunked out. I'd given her lab space, shared my connections. Hell, I'd even co-signed the loan for her business. And this was my thanks? That's when I did something that surprised even me. Instead of yelling back, instead of trying to grab her hands to stop the destruction, I pulled out my phone and hit record. The old me would have been pleading with her, trying to calm her down, probably apologizing for getting the grant in the first place. But something had shifted in that moment. Maybe it was watching her destroy something I loved. Maybe it was the sheer calculated cruelty of her choices. Or maybe I was just tired of always being the one to back down. Every camera here is recording, I said quietly, gesturing to the security system I'd installed after some equipment went missing from the university lab. You just ended your own career. She laughed. Actually laughed. This wild, unhinged sound that bounced off the basement walls. You think anyone's going to believe poor little Marcus over me? My father donates more to your precious university in a year than you'll ever make. That's when I walked over to the security monitor and turned it toward her. Her face, flushed with rage and destruction, stared back at her in high definition. Multiple angles. Crystal clear audio. The timestamp showing today's date. The laughter died in her throat. For the first time in 7 years of marriage, Brielle had absolutely nothing to say. I looked around at the wreckage of my life's work, then back at my wife, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one who'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. You want to know the real kicker about Brielle? She used to be brilliant. Like, scary brilliant. When we first met at Northwestern, she was this biotech prodigy who could explain complex cellular mechanisms like she was talking about the weather. Professors loved her. Other students either wanted to be her or be with her. Hell, I was probably both. She had this way of making you feel like you were part of something bigger, something important. That's what made watching her destroy my lab so damn heartbreaking. See, Brielle didn't just randomly flame out of her PhD program. It was a slow-motion train wreck that took 3 years to fully crash. First, she started missing deadlines. Then came the excuses. Her advisor was biased. The funding was unfair. Other students were sabotaging her work. I believed her at first because, honestly, academia can be brutal. But then I started noticing things. Her research proposals sounded familiar. Too familiar. Turns out she'd been lifting ideas from published papers and hoping nobody would catch on. When her committee finally called her on it during her defense, she didn't even try to explain. She just walked out. I still remember that night. She came home, kicked off her heels, and said, "Screw it. I'm starting my own company." Just like that. Like failing out of a PhD program was some minor inconvenience instead of the career-ending disaster it actually was. But I supported her anyway. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You believe in their comeback story. So I gave her space in my lab. Not just any space. Prime real estate right next to my tissue culture hood. I introduced her to my contacts, helped her write business plans, even let her use some of my equipment for her skincare research. Yes, skincare. From cutting-edge biotech to face cream. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my mouth shut. She was trying to rebuild, and I wanted to be the supportive husband. But here's the thing about jealousy, it's like cancer. It starts small, maybe just a weird comment here and there, then spreads until it consumes everything healthy around it. Every time I had a breakthrough, Brielle found a way to minimize it. When I published in Nature, she said it was because I had connections. When I got invited to speak at conferences, she claimed it was because I was a diversity hire. Each success of mine became evidence of some grand conspiracy against her. The night of the grand announcement, I should have seen this coming. She'd been weird all week, asking pointed questions about my research timeline, my funding applications, even my relationship with the grant committee. I thought she was just being supportive, maybe finally taking a real interest in my work. God, I was naive. But watching her in that basement, destroying everything with surgical precision, I realized this wasn't some spontaneous breakdown. This was calculated. She knew exactly which equipment was most expensive, which samples were irreplaceable. She went straight for my latest cell cultures, 3 months of work that couldn't be recreated. This wasn't grief or frustration. This was warfare. "You think you deserve this?" she screamed, holding up a vial containing my most promising cancer cell line. "You think $2 million just falls into the lap of someone who barely graduated med school?" That stung. I'd struggled through medical school, sure, but I'd found my calling in research. And barely graduated? I finished in the top 15% of my class. But Brielle had this talent for finding your weakest spots and pressing down hard. That's when Jordan showed up. My research assistant had heard the commotion from upstairs where he'd been helping me organize grant paperwork. Poor kid took one look at the destruction and tried to do what I should have done. Physically stop her. "Mrs. Bellamy, please, you need to calm down." She shoved him. Hard. Jordan's this skinny 23-year-old who probably weighs less than my lab equipment, and my wife, all 5'2" of her, sent him stumbling backward into a cabinet full of glassware. The crash was deafening, and for a second, I thought she might have seriously hurt him. That's when I snapped out of my shock paralysis. Not because of the destroyed equipment or even the years of work down the drain. but because she'd put her hands on someone who was just trying to help. Someone who looked up to me, who trusted me to create a safe working environment. "Every camera here is recording," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You just ended your own career." Her laugh was the sound of 7 years of marriage dying in real time. This bitter, manic cackle that made my skin crawl. "Career? What career, Marcus? You think anyone's going to side with you over me? My daddy's donated more money to your little university than your entire department's budget." She actually said daddy, like she was 5 years old instead of a 32-year-old woman having a nuclear meltdown in my basement. That's when I walked over to the security monitor, the one I'd installed after some expensive reagents went missing from campus. The screen showed multiple angles of the destruction, crystal clear footage of everything she'd done. The timestamp, the audio, her face twisted with rage as she systematically destroyed my life's work. I turned the monitor toward her, and for the first time since I'd known her, Brielle was completely speechless. The laughter died like someone had flipped a switch. Her face went from flushed with rage to marble white in about 2 seconds. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I looked around at the wreckage of everything I'd built, at Jordan picking glass out of his palm, at 7 years of my life scattered across the concrete floor. The old me would have turned off the cameras and helped her clean up the mess. The new me just stood there and let the truth speak for itself. You know what they say about the calm after the storm? It's bullshit. There's nothing calm about sitting in your destroyed lab at 3 in the morning, writing an incident report that's going to blow up your entire life. But that's exactly where I found myself, laptop balanced on the one table Brielle hadn't managed to flip over, trying to find the right words to explain how my wife had just committed academic suicide in high definition. The footage was damning. 23 minutes of pure destruction, captured from 4 different angles with audio, so clear you could hear her breathing between screams. I'd already backed it up to 3 different cloud services and burned it onto 2 DVDs. Yeah, DVDs. Old school, but my dad always said never trust technology when your ass is on the line. Jordan had gone home around midnight after we'd swept up the worst of the glass. Kid was a trooper, even offered to help me write the report. But this was something I had to do alone. This was my marriage, my lab, my career, and my decision to burn it all down in the name of truth. The incident report form was surprisingly straightforward for something that was about to ruin lives. Name of incident: destruction of university property and research materials. Date and time: check. Location: check. But when I got to the section asking for a description of events, my fingers just froze over the keyboard. How do you explain that the person you've shared a bed with for 7 years just tried to destroy everything you've ever worked for? How do you write down that the woman you once planned to have kids with turned into a screaming banshee because you succeeded where she failed? The clinical language of the form seemed inadequate for the emotional carnage I was documenting. At approximately 9:47 p.m., I started typing. I discovered my spouse, Dr. Brielle Bellamy, in my home laboratory destroying university-owned equipment and research materials. God, even calling her doctor felt wrong now. She'd never finished her doctorate, but I'd always used the title anyway. One more way I'd enabled her delusions. The hardest part was attaching the video files. Each click felt like loading bullets into a gun I was about to point at my own marriage. But I did it anyway. For video files, crystal clear audio, 23 minutes of evidence that would make this an open and shut case. By 4 a.m., I had a 10-page report complete with timestamps, equipment serial numbers, and estimated damages. The total came to just over $180,000. Not counting the research samples. Those were priceless in the truest sense. You literally couldn't put a price on 3 months of cell cultures that had been developing perfectly until they met the bottom of Brielle's designer heels. I hit send at 4:23 a.m. The email went to Dr. Patricia Wells, head of the Ethics Committee, with copies to the department chair, the dean, and university legal counsel. No going back now. I'd just officially reported my wife for academic misconduct and destruction of property. In any other situation, this would feel like the ultimate betrayal. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 7 years. My phone started ringing at 6:15 a.m. I was still in the lab, having dozed off at my desk, when Dr. Wells' name popped up on the caller ID. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but I'd started this avalanche. Might as well ride it down the mountain. Marcus. Her voice was gentle but serious. I've reviewed your report and the video evidence. I'm calling an emergency ethics committee meeting for this afternoon. Are you prepared to present this formally? Was I prepared? Hell no. Nothing prepares you for nuking your own life. But I was committed now. Yes, ma'am. I'll be there. Good. And Marcus? I want you to know that what happened to you was completely unacceptable. The university takes these matters very seriously, regardless of who's involved. That last part hit different. Regardless of who's involved. She was talking about Brielle's father, obviously. Everyone knew Richard Cavendish had deep pockets and deeper connections. His donations had funded half the new biotech building. His name was literally carved in marble above the entrance. But Dr. Wells was telling me that wouldn't matter. At least, she was saying it wouldn't matter. After I hung up, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. I'd just declared war on one of the university's biggest benefactors. I'd probably made enemies of people I'd never even met. And I'd definitely ended my marriage in the most public, humiliating way possible. But you know what? As I sat there in my destroyed lab, surrounded by the wreckage of 7 years of trying to be the supportive husband, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. For once in my adult life, I hadn't backed down. I hadn't made excuses or tried to smooth things over or protect someone else's feelings at the expense of my own sanity. I'd simply told the truth and let the chips fall where they may. The old Marcus would have cleaned up the mess and pretended nothing happened. The new Marcus had just sent a declaration of independence to the ethics committee with video evidence attached. Walking into that boardroom felt like entering a courtroom where I was simultaneously the prosecutor, victim, and star witness. The ethics committee had assembled the full board, 12 heavy hitters who could make or break careers with a single vote. I'd seen most of these faces at university functions over the years, always from a distance, always while they were schmoozing with donors or celebrating some new endowment. Now they were all staring at me like I was either a hero or a complete idiot for taking on the Cavendish family. Dr. Patricia Wells sat at the head of the mahogany table, her silver hair pulled back in that no-nonsense bun that made her look like she could stare down a hurricane. She'd been running the ethics committee for 15 years, and rumor had it she'd never lost a case she believed in. Today, I was really hoping she believed in mine. Dr. Bellamy, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Thank you for coming in on such short notice. We've all reviewed your incident report and the accompanying video evidence. Before we begin formal proceedings, is there anything you'd like to add to your statement? I looked around the table at faces I recognized from university newsletters and donor galas. Dr. Chun from the physics department, who'd won a Nobel Prize back in the 90s. Professor Martinez from the law school, whose textbooks were used at Harvard. Dean Thompson, who'd been pushing for my promotion to full professor just last month. These weren't just academics. They were titans in their fields, and they were all here because my wife had lost her damn mind in my basement. No, ma'am, I said, keeping my voice steady. I think the evidence speaks for itself. That's when Dr. Wells nodded to her assistant, who dimmed the lights and fired up the projection system. 3 large screens descended from the ceiling, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of breaking glass and Brielle's voice screaming about how she deserved my grant money more than I did. Watching it again was surreal. The first time, I'd been in shock, just trying to process what was happening. Now, seeing it from the committee's perspective, the sheer calculated nature of the destruction was obvious. Brielle wasn't having a random breakdown. She was methodically targeting the most expensive and irreplaceable items in my lab. She knew exactly what she was doing. The room was dead silent except for the audio from the video. Brielle's voice echoed off the boardroom walls. I've been working just as hard. Where's my $2 million? Then came the crash of my microscope hitting the CNC. Him into the cabinet. Professor Martinez leaned forward in his chair. The look on his face was pure disgust. These people had probably seen academic disputes before, maybe even some heated arguments, but this level of violence was clearly outside their experience. The video played for the full 23 minutes. Nobody spoke. Nobody checked their phones. They just watched my marriage implode in high definition while my life's work got scattered across a basement floor. When it finally ended and the lights came back up, the silence was deafening. Dr. Wells was the first to speak. Dr. Bellamy, this facility was supposed to be secure. How did your wife gain access to university equipment? I had given her keycard access. I replied, feeling like an idiot for ever trusting her. She occasionally used the space for her own research. That access has obviously been revoked. Obviously, Dr. Wells said dryly. And the equipment destroyed. This was all university property. The microscope, centrifuge, and most of the larger equipment, yes. Some of the smaller items were personal purchases, but everything was being used for university-funded research. Dean Thompson spoke up next. Dr. Bellamy, I have to ask, were there any warning signs? Any previous incidents of aggressive behavior? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Had there been signs? Hell yes, there had been signs. 7 years of subtle put-downs, jealous comments, and attempts to undermine my confidence. But nothing like this. Nothing that would have predicted a full-scale assault on my laboratory. Nothing that would have indicated she was capable of this level of destruction, I said carefully. Our marriage had its problems, but I never imagined she would resort to vandalism. Professor Martinez cleared his throat. Dr. Bellamy, we need to discuss the elephant in the room. Mrs. Bellamy's father is a significant donor to this university. Are you prepared for the potential consequences of these proceedings? There it was. The question everyone had been dancing around. Was I ready to go to war with Richard Cavendish's checkbook? Was I prepared to potentially lose my job, my funding, maybe even my career in academia? I looked around the table at these 12 people who held my professional future in their hands. A month ago, I would have backed down. I would have found some way to minimize the situation, maybe even apologized for letting things get out of hand. But sitting there, watching their faces after they'd seen what Brielle had done, I realized something important. They weren't looking at me like I was the problem. They were looking at me like I was the victim. With all due respect, I said, meeting each of their gazes, Mrs. Bellamy's father didn't destroy my lab. She did. And if we let family connections override video evidence, then we're not the institution I thought I was working for. Dr. Wells smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. Dr. Bellamy, I think I speak for the entire committee when I say we couldn't agree more. After the boardroom showdown, I needed space to think. My apartment felt like a tomb, too quiet, too empty, filled with pictures of Brielle and me from better times that now looked like crime scene evidence. So I did what I always did when life got overwhelming. I buried myself in paperwork. Insurance claims, equipment replacement forms, damage assessments. Numbers didn't lie or betray you or smash your microscope because they were jealous. Numbers were safe. I was 3 hours deep into calculating replacement costs when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. Aunt Lydia, my mom's younger sister, the one who still sent Christmas cards with handwritten notes and remembered my birthday every year without Facebook reminders. We'd grown apart after Mom died 5 years ago, not from any bad blood, just that natural drift that happens when the person connecting you is gone. Marcus, honey, her voice was warm but concerned. I saw the news about what happened. Are you okay? The news. Right. Of course this had made the local papers. University researcher's wife destroys lab was probably too juicy a story for the campus newspaper to ignore. I wondered how much detail they'd included, whether they'd mentioned the grant money or just focused on the destruction. I'm managing Aunt Lydia. It's been a rough few days, but I'm getting through it. I can imagine. Listen, sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned years ago, but your mother made me promise to wait until you really needed to know. That got my attention. Mom had been the queen of family secrets. Not malicious ones, just the kind of information she doled out when she thought you were ready to handle it. Like when she finally told me at 18 that Dad had wanted to name me after his father, Mortimer, and she'd had to stage a 3-day hunger strike to get him to agree to Marcus instead. What kind of something? I asked, pushing aside the insurance forms. There was a long pause, the kind that happens when someone's trying to figure out how to drop a bomb gently. Marcus, when your mother died, she left behind an education fund. Money she'd been saving since you were born for your future and your children's future. It was substantial, about $400,000. My hand tightened on the phone. Mom had been a nurse, Dad a high school teacher. Where the hell had they gotten 400 grand to set aside? Aunt Lydia, I never knew about any fund. When Mom died, her will just mention some savings bonds and her jewelry. That's because the fund had already been transferred, she said quietly. About 3 years ago, someone convinced your father-in-law to move the money into a private investment account. For a business venture, they said. Something about biotechnology having better returns than traditional education savings. The room suddenly felt smaller. My chest got tight, like someone was slowly turning a vice around my ribcage. Who convinced him? But I already knew. Deep down, in that part of your gut that recognizes betrayal even when your brain is still playing catch-up, I already knew exactly who had convinced Richard Cavendish to invest my mother's legacy. Brielle, Aunt Lydia said gently. She told Richard it would be a surprise for you, using your mother's money to fund her startup so she could eventually bring you in as a partner. She said you'd be thrilled to see your mom's savings being used to build something together. I set the phone down on the desk and put my head in my hands. For $100,000. My mom had worked double shifts for 30 years, picking up extra hours at the hospital, skipping vacations, driving cars until they literally fell apart, all to make sure I'd have opportunities she and Dad never did. And Brielle had convinced her father to hand it over for her fucking skincare company. Marcus? Are you still there? I picked up the phone. Yeah, I'm here. Aunt Lydia, are you absolutely sure about this? I have copies of the original documents your mother left with me. Bank statements, transfer records, everything. She wanted me to give them to you when you turned 40, or if you ever really needed them. I think this qualifies as really needing them. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I almost had to admire the craftsmanship. Brielle hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen from my dead mother. She'd taken money that was meant to secure my future, my children's future, and used it to fund a business that was basically selling overpriced moisturizer to desperate housewives. How much did she get? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. All of it. The entire $400,000, plus accumulated interest. It came to about $460,000 by the time it was transferred. Nearly $500,000. Money my mother had scrimped and saved for decades. Money she'd hidden away despite Dad's protests that they couldn't afford to save anything. Money she'd left for me because she wanted me to have choices she never had. Marcus, there's more, Aunt Lydia continued. I looked into the business registration after I heard about what happened. That skincare company of hers. It's been operating at a loss for 2 years. The money's gone, honey. All of it. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Because what else do you do when you discover your wife didn't just destroy your lab and humiliate you in front of the university board? She also embezzled your inheritance and pissed it away on a failing business venture? Are you laughing or crying? Aunt Lydia asked. Because from here, it's hard to tell. Both, I think. Definitely both. I'm driving down tomorrow with all the paperwork. We're going to figure this out, okay? Your mother didn't save that money for 30 years just so some spoiled brat could flush it down the drain. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment staring at the insurance forms scattered across my desk. Suddenly, replacing lab equipment seemed like the least of my problems. Brielle hadn't just destroyed my research, she'd robbed my family. She'd looked my grieving father-in-law in the eye and convinced him to hand over money that represented my mother's life's work. The woman I'd been married to for 7 years wasn't just jealous or vindictive. She was a straight-up criminal. And tomorrow, I was going to start treating her like one. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom working those double shifts at the hospital, coming home exhausted but still insisting on helping me with my science fair projects. She'd been so proud when I got into medical school, crying happy tears in the parking lot after my acceptance letter came. Now I knew she'd been sacrificing for decades to make sure I'd have opportunities, and my wife had basically stolen that sacrifice to fund her vanity project. By morning, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I dragged myself to campus anyway. The university had given me a temporary lab space while they processed the insurance claims, and I needed to salvage what little research I could from the wreckage. Plus, sitting at home meant more time to think about everything I'd lost, and I wasn't ready for that level of self-pity yet. I was hunched over my laptop in the makeshift workspace, trying to recreate 3 months of data from memory when my email pinged. The sender's name made me do a double take. Dr. Zaire Monroe, Nova Biotech. I knew that name. Hell, anyone in cancer research knew that name. She was like the Michael Jordan of cellular regeneration, the woman who'd revolutionized how we thought about tissue repair after chemotherapy. Her lab had published papers that basically rewrote textbooks. The subject line was simple: regarding your recent research challenges. My first thought was that she'd heard about the lab destruction and was offering condolences. Maybe some generic hang-in-there message that successful researchers sent to their less fortunate colleagues. But when I opened the email, my jaw literally dropped. Dr. Bellamy, it began, I've been following your work on regenerative cell mapping with great interest. Your approach to targeting damaged tissue post-chemotherapy shows remarkable innovation and could represent a significant breakthrough in patient recovery protocols. Okay, so far so good. Professional acknowledgement from someone whose opinion actually mattered. But then came the paragraph that made my heart stop. I'm reaching out because your wife once submitted a proposal to our research committee that bore striking similarities to your published work. The methodology, the cellular targeting approach, even some of the specific terminology was nearly identical to papers you'd published months earlier. We suspected academic theft at the time, but had no way to prove the connection. Recent events have provided context we previously lacked. I read that paragraph 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Brielle had tried to steal my research and pitch it to Nova Biotech? When the hell had that happened? And more importantly, how had I not known about it? The email continued. We declined her proposal, of course, citing concerns about intellectual property and originality. At the time, we assumed it was simply a case of insufficient citation and poor research practices. Now we understand it was something far more serious. I was gripping my phone so hard I thought I might crack the screen. Brielle hadn't just stolen my mother's money. She'd been stealing my actual research ideas and shopping them around to other labs. This was beyond jealousy or vindictiveness. This was systematic, calculated theft of intellectual property. But Dr. Monroe wasn't done dropping bombs. Given the circumstances, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to visit our facility next week. We have an opening for a lead scientist position focused on regenerative therapy research. The position comes with a full research team, unlimited access to cutting-edge equipment, and most importantly, comprehensive intellectual property protection for all your work. I had to read that sentence 5 times. Nova Biotech was offering me a job. Not just any job, a lead scientist position with my own team and unlimited resources. It was like being offered a spot in the research equivalent of the Yankees. The email concluded with, your recent grant success demonstrates the caliber of your work, and we believe Nova Biotech could provide the environment you need to pursue your research without the complications you've recently experienced. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss this opportunity. She'd included her direct phone number. Her direct phone number. I was pretty sure Dr. Zaire Monroe didn't give out her direct number to random researchers who'd just had their labs destroyed by psychotic spouses. I stared at that number for about 10 minutes, trying to convince myself this wasn't some elaborate prank. Then I thought about my mom's stolen education fund, my destroyed lab, and Brielle's history of intellectual theft, and I dialed. She answered on the second ring. Dr. Monroe? This is Marcus Bellamy. I just received your email about the position at Nova Biotech. Dr. Bellamy, thank you for calling so quickly. I hope you'll forgive my directness, but we've been wanting to bring you aboard for months. Recent events simply provided the perfect opportunity to extend an offer. You've been wanting to recruit me? Your cellular mapping research is exactly the kind of innovative work we need. We've been following your publications since your Nature paper 18 months ago. Frankly, we were waiting for your current grant obligations to conclude before making an approach, but circumstances have obviously changed. Circumstances had definitely changed. 24 hours ago, I was a researcher with a destroyed lab and a criminal wife. Now I was potentially looking at a complete career upgrade with one of the most prestigious biotech companies in the country. Dr. Monroe, I have to ask, the intellectual property protection you mentioned, how comprehensive are we talking? She laughed, but not in a condescending way. More like she understood exactly why I was asking. Dr. Bellamy, every idea you generate, every breakthrough you achieve, every patent you file belongs to you. We provide the resources and support, but the innovations remain yours. We learned a long time ago that the best researchers need ownership of their work to do their best thinking. By the end of that 15-minute phone call, I had a formal job offer, a research budget that was 3 times what I'd been working with, and a team of graduate students who actually wanted to be there. All I had to do was say yes. I looked around at my temporary workspace, with its borrowed equipment and patched-together research setup, then thought about my destroyed lab and my thieving wife. "Dr. Monroe," I said, "when can I start?" I should have known Brielle wouldn't go quietly. The woman who'd stolen my mother's inheritance and tried to sell my research to other labs wasn't exactly the type to accept consequences gracefully. So when I got served with a cease and desist order 3 days after accepting the Nova Biotech position, I wasn't really surprised. Disappointed in humanity? Sure. But surprised? Not even a little. The papers arrived via certified mail while I was packing up the last of my salvageable research materials. The legal letterhead was fancy: Cavendish, Stone and Associates. Of course, Brielle's daddy had his own law firm. The letter itself was a masterpiece of legal bullshit, claiming I had willfully and maliciously sabotaged her business venture and demanding I cease all defamatory statements regarding her professional conduct. Defamatory statements, like video evidence of her destroying my lab, was somehow me talking trash about her character. The best part was the accusation that I'd orchestrated a campaign of professional assassination designed to damage Dr. Brielle Cavendish's reputation in the biotech community. They were calling her Dr. Cavendish now, apparently forgetting that she'd never actually finished her doctorate. But hey, when your dad owns the law firm, I guess you can rewrite history however you want. According to the cease and desist, I was supposed to retract all statements made to the University Ethics Committee, issue a public apology for mischaracterizing the events in my lab, and pay damages for lost business opportunities resulting from my false accusations. The amount they were asking for? $2.5 million. Apparently, my destroyed microscope had somehow cost Brielle more than my entire grant was worth. I read through the whole thing twice, marveling at the sheer audacity. Then I forwarded it to the university's legal counsel with a subject line that probably wasn't professional but felt appropriate. "You're not gonna believe this shit." The response came back in less than an hour. Not from some junior attorney or paralegal, but from Janet Morrison herself, the head of university legal. Her email was exactly one word long: handled. I had to admit, I was curious what handled meant in university lawyer speak. I didn't have to wait long to find out. By noon, my phone was buzzing with a call from Dr. Wells. Her voice had that particular tone of barely controlled rage that meant someone was about to have a very bad day, and for once, it wasn't going to be me. "Marcus, I wanted to personally inform you that formal charges have been filed against Mrs. Bellamy for destruction of university property and theft of research materials. The district attorney's office has also been notified about potential wire fraud charges related to the misappropriation of your family's education fund." Wire fraud. That sounded serious. That sounded like the kind of serious that came with federal prison time. The university board met in emergency session this morning, Dr. Wells continued, and voted unanimously to permanently ban Mrs. Bellamy from all campus facilities. Additionally, we've sent a detailed report to the Better Business Bureau and the State Licensing Board regarding her business practices. I could practically hear the sound of Brielle's world crumbling through the phone. A permanent campus ban meant she'd never work in academic research again. The BBB report would kill any legitimate business opportunities. And federal fraud charges? That was career suicide with a side of potential jail time. "Dr. Wells, what about the cease and desist order?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "Marcus, threatening a victim of property destruction for reporting the crime is called intimidation. It's also illegal. Mr. Cavendish's attorneys will be receiving their own legal correspondence by close of business today." An hour later, the university's public relations office released a statement that was basically a professional way of saying, "Brielle Cavendish is a lying criminal, and we support Marcus Bellamy 100%. The actual language was more diplomatic, but the message was crystal clear. The university was treating this as an attack on academic integrity itself. The statement read, "The university stands firmly behind Dr. Marcus Bellamy and condemns all acts of academic sabotage. We take the protection of our researchers and their work extremely seriously. Individuals who attempt to intimidate or silence victims of property destruction will face the full consequences of their actions." That last sentence wasn't subtle. They were basically telling Richard Cavendish and his legal team to back the hell off or face a lawsuit from the university's own lawyers. My phone rang again around 3 o'clock. This time it was Aunt Lydia. "Marcus, honey, You need to see the news. Channel 7 just ran a story about Brielle and her father. Apparently, the FBI raided their law offices this morning. The FBI. Jesus Christ. What had started as my wife destroying my lab had somehow escalated to federal investigators raiding her father's business. This was like watching a small kitchen fire turn into a 5-alarm blaze that consumed the entire neighborhood. I turned on the news, and there it was. Footage of federal agents carrying boxes out of Cavendish, Stone and Associates, while reporters shouted questions about wire fraud and embezzlement. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Local attorney under investigation for education fund fraud." The reporter was standing in front of the law firm's downtown offices, explaining how the investigation had started with a university incident report and expanded into a broader inquiry into financial misconduct. They showed Brielle's photo, her professional headshot from the business website, all perfect makeup and confident smile. The woman in that picture looked nothing like the screaming banshee who'd destroyed my lab. Then they showed my photo, my university faculty picture from 3 years ago, back when I still looked optimistic about life. The caption read, Dr. Marcus Bellamy, victim of academic sabotage. Victim, not estranged husband or party to a domestic dispute. Victim. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. You think you've won, but this isn't over. You destroyed our family. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Janet Morrison with a note, adding to the intimidation file. Her response came back in minutes. Evidence received. Thank you for documenting everything. The old Marcus would have felt guilty about ruining so many lives. The old Marcus would have wondered if there was some way to fix this mess without destroying everyone involved. The new Marcus just turned off his phone and started planning his first day at Nova Biotech. Some bridges are meant to be burned. The first thing that hit me when I walked into Nova Biotech wasn't the smell of new equipment or the hum of cutting-edge machinery. It was the silence. Not dead silence, but the productive kind, the sound of people who actually wanted to be there, doing work they believed in, without the constant undercurrent of drama that had poisoned my last few years at the university. The building itself was like something out of a science fiction movie. Glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with labs that looked more like spaceship command centers than the cramped, outdated facilities I'd been working in. But it wasn't just the fancy equipment that impressed me. It was the way people moved through the space. Confident, focused, like they knew they were part of something important. Dr. Monroe met me in the lobby at exactly 8 a.m., wearing a crisp white lab coat over dark jeans and looking like she could have stepped off the cover of Scientific American. She had this energy about her, like she was constantly thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but in a way that made you want to keep up rather than feel left behind. Welcome to Nova, Marcus, she said, shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that told you she didn't have time for bullshit. Ready to see what real research infrastructure looks like? She wasn't kidding. The tour took 2 hours, and every room was more impressive than the last. Equipment I'd only dreamed of using, computer systems that could run complex simulations in minutes instead of days, and lab spaces so clean you could probably perform surgery in them. But the thing that really got me was the library, an actual physical library with books and journals, but also digital archives that went back decades and forward-thinking research terminals where you could collaborate with teams around the globe in real time. This is where the magic happens, Dr. Monroe said, gesturing to a conference room with walls covered in whiteboards. Every Tuesday, the entire research staff meets here to share discoveries, troubleshoot problems, and brainstorm new approaches. No egos, no territorial bullshit. Just science. After 7 years of departmental politics and funding squabbles, the idea of colleagues actually collaborating instead of competing felt revolutionary. At the university, sharing research was like giving away trade secrets. Here, it seemed like the whole point was to build on each other's work. That's when I met Suki Chun, not related to the Nobel Prize winner. She clarified with a grin, just unfortunate enough to share a last name. She was my new project lead, a 30-something bioengineering genius who spoke about cellular regeneration like she was discussing her favorite hobby. Her workspace was organized chaos, research papers pinned to every available surface, multiple monitors displaying complex molecular models, and a coffee mug that read, "I turn coffee into cures." So you're the guy who's going to help us figure out how to rebuild tissue after chemo destroys it, she said, not bothering with small talk. Dr. Monroe showed me your work on targeted cellular mapping. That shit is brilliant. I'd been expecting the usual academic politeness, the careful feeling out process that happens when researchers from different institutions try to work together. Instead, Suki was treating me like we'd been collaborating for years. I have to ask, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. How much do you know about my recent situation? She raised an eyebrow. You mean how your psycho wife tried to destroy your career and steal your research? Pretty much everything. Dr. Monroe briefed the whole team when she decided to recruit you. The bluntness should have been embarrassing, but instead it was refreshing. No tiptoeing around the subject, no awkward sympathy. Just acknowledgement that some fucked up stuff had happened, and now we were moving forward. Look, Suki continued, I've seen brilliant researchers get derailed by personal drama. The difference is whether you let it define you or use it as fuel. Based on your work, I'm betting you're the fuel type. She was right. Sitting in that pristine lab, surrounded by equipment that actually worked and people who actually cared about science, I realized something important. Brielle's destruction of my old lab wasn't just an ending, it was a liberation. All those years I'd been making compromises, working with outdated equipment, tiptoeing around departmental politics, trying to keep the peace at home. Now I was free to focus on what actually mattered. What's our timeline looking like? I asked, already mentally cataloging the research I could restart with proper resources. Suki pulled up a project overview on her computer. Dr. Monroe wants us to have preliminary results within 6 months, full trial data within 18. Think you can rebuild 3 months of destroyed research, and then some. I looked around at the lab that was about to become my new home base, 3 times the size of my old space, with equipment I'd only seen in professional journals. Then I thought about my $2 million grant, which had successfully transferred to Nova along with my employment. Money that would now go toward actual research instead of getting absorbed by university overhead and administrative fees. Suki, I said, feeling genuinely optimistic for the first time in months. I'm not here to rebuild what I had. I'm here to build something better. She grinned and held up her coffee mug in a mock toast. Now that's what I'm talking about. Welcome to Nova, Dr. Bellamy. Let's go cure some cancer. For the first time in 7 years, I was working with people who wanted me to succeed as much as I did. No jealousy, no sabotage, no walking on eggshells to protect someone else's fragile ego. Just pure, collaborative science. The old Marcus had been trying to balance research with relationship drama. The new Marcus was free to focus on what he did best, and he had the best possible team to help him do it. 3 weeks into my new life at Nova Biotech, I'd established a routine that felt almost foreign in its simplicity. Wake up at 6, hit the gym in the building's fitness center, grab coffee from the cafe that actually knew how to make decent espresso, and dive into research that was progressing faster than I'd ever imagined possible. No drama, no sabotage, no walking on eggshells around someone else's insecurities. Just pure, unfiltered science. Suki and I had already made more progress on cellular regeneration mapping than I'd managed in the previous 6 months at the university. With access to Nova's quantum computing resources, we could run simulations that would have taken weeks on the old university systems. The preliminary results were so promising that Dr. Monroe had fast-tracked us for a presentation to the advisory board, something that usually took new teams at least a year to achieve. I was reviewing our latest data models when the mail arrived. Most days, I barely glanced at the stack of industry journals and administrative correspondence that accumulated on my desk. But today, sitting on top of the pile like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, was a handwritten envelope with my name in Brielle's distinctive cursive. For a moment, I just stared at it. 3 weeks of peace, and she was still finding ways to insert herself into my life. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened. What could she possibly have to say that I needed to hear? But curiosity won out, the same intellectual drive that made me a good researcher, making me want to examine this final piece of our relationship's wreckage. The letter was written on expensive stationery, the kind Brielle had always insisted on buying even when we were living paycheck to paycheck. Her handwriting was more erratic than usual, like she'd been drinking while writing it, or maybe just shaking with rage. Marcus, it began, no greeting, no pretense of civility. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've managed to destroy everything I worked for, everything I built, everything I dreamed of accomplishing. The FBI seized my business accounts. My father's law firm is under federal investigation. Our friends won't return my calls. I've become a pariah in the biotech community, all because you couldn't handle the fact that I had ambition too. I had to pause there. The complete lack of self-awareness was staggering. She was making herself the victim in a story where she'd literally committed multiple felonies. But I kept reading, morbidly fascinated by this final glimpse into the mind that had once shared my bed and my dreams. You humiliated me in front of the entire university, the letter continued. You made me look like some kind of criminal when all I did was react emotionally to years of being overshadowed by your precious research. You think you're so noble, so righteous, but you're just a vindictive little man who couldn't stand that his wife had bigger dreams than he did. Bigger dreams. That's what she was calling theft and intellectual property fraud. Bigger dreams. I built you, Marcus. Before you met me, you were just another mediocre student stumbling through medical school. I pushed you to be better, to work harder, to reach for something beyond your limited vision. Without me, you never would have had the drive to pursue research at this level. You never would have pushed yourself to compete for grants or recognition. You owe everything you've achieved to the foundation I provided. The delusion was almost impressive in its completeness. In Brielle's version of history, she was the architect of my success, and I was just the ungrateful beneficiary who'd turned on his creator. Never mind that my best work had come in the last few weeks, free from her constant criticism and sabotage. Never mind that every major breakthrough in my career had happened despite her interference, not because of it. But the worst part, the letter went on, is that you've convinced yourself you're the victim here. You parade around telling everyone how your poor little lab got destroyed, how your mean wife betrayed you, how you're just an innocent researcher who got caught up in domestic drama. It's pathetic. You know what really happened that night? I finally got tired of watching you waste your potential. I got tired of being married to someone who was content to be mediocre when he could be extraordinary. I had to put the letter down for a moment. The sheer audacity of reframing destruction of property and theft as some kind of motivational intervention was breathtaking. But there was more. You want to know the truth, Marcus? You needed me to destroy that lab. You were too comfortable, too satisfied with your small-time university research and your modest little grants. You needed someone to force you out of your comfort zone, to make you reach for something bigger. And look what happened. 3 weeks after I destroyed your precious lab, you're working at one of the most prestigious biotech companies in the country with unlimited resources and a team of brilliant researchers. The letter concluded with a paragraph that somehow managed to be both self-aggrandizing and pathetic. So when you're accepting your Nobel Prize, or whatever other accolades come your way, remember who really made it possible. Remember that it was my destruction that freed you to become who you were meant to be. You can hate me, you can blame me, you can even send me to prison, but you can't deny that I'm the reason you're finally living up to your potential. In a twisted way, destroying your lab was the greatest gift I ever gave you. You're welcome. She'd signed it simply B, not even Brielle, or your wife, or any acknowledgement of what we'd once meant to each other. Just a single letter, like she was already erasing herself from my story. I read the entire thing twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in a file folder labeled Legal Evidence. Because that's what it was, a written confession of intentional destruction disguised as a delusional manifesto. Janet Morrison would probably find it useful if the case went to trial. But as I filed it away, I realized something unexpected. Brielle was right about one thing. Destroying my lab had freed me to become something better. Not because I needed her destructive intervention, but because it had finally shown me what I was capable of when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's insecurities and betrayals. That afternoon, I stood in Nova's main conference room presenting our preliminary findings to the advisory board. 12 of the most respected names in biotech, listening intently as I explained how our cellular regeneration research could revolutionize cancer recovery. The data was compelling, the methodology was sound, and the potential applications were staggering. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine enthusiasm from people who understood the significance of what we'd accomplished. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Nobel laureate, not Suki's non-relation, actually stood up. Dr. Bellamy, she said, this is exactly the kind of breakthrough Nova was founded to support. How quickly can you move to human trials? 6 months ago, I'd been begging the university for basic equipment funding. Now I was being asked how fast I could revolutionize cancer treatment. I looked around the room at faces that respected my work, valued my contributions, and wanted to see me succeed. No jealousy, no sabotage, no hidden agendas. Just collaborative science at its finest. Dr. Chun, I said, feeling more confident than I had in years. Give me 6 months for phase 1 trials. 18 months, and we'll have data that changes everything. The room buzzed with excitement, and I realized that Brielle's letter had been right about one thing. I was finally living up to my potential, but not because she'd destroyed my lab, because I'd finally escaped her.